Hi guys, welcome. We are starting Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing this week. So we would really do this in our literature circles in the classroom, kind of sit in our circle and read the story out loud to one another. But since we can't do that, I'm going to read some of it to you. So you can either listen to me read it or you can kind of read on your own. I'm going to do two videos, one for chapters 1 and 2. And then depending on how long 3 and 4 are, I'll either break them up or we'll read them together. So here we go. Okay, so Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. This one's by Judy Blume. You probably have read some of her other books before. I know if you were in Mrs. Carney's class or Mrs. Durham's class, sometimes they read a lot of the Judy Blume series to you. And you may or may not have already read Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, but if you know what's happening, keep it to yourself so that you don't ruin it for anyone else. So chapter 1 is actually very short. There are 10 chapters in this book. And then at the end of this week, we are going to read chapters 1 through 4, and then you're going to take a quiz on those chapters. So here we go. Chapter 1, The Big Winner. I won dribble at Jimmy Fargo's birthday party. All the other guys got to take home goldfish in little plastic bags. I won him because I guessed there were 348 jelly beans in Mrs. Fargo's jar. Really, there were 423, she told us later. Still, my guess was closest. Peter Warren Hatcher is the big winner, Mrs. Fargo announced. At first, I felt bad that I didn't get the goldfish too. Then Jimmy handed me a glass bowl. Inside, there was some water and 3 rocks. A tiny green turtle was sleeping on the biggest rock. All the other guys looked at their goldfish. I knew what they were thinking. They wished they could have tiny green turtles too. I named my turtle Dribble while I was walking home from Jimmy's party. I live at 25 West 68th Street. It's an old apartment building, but it's got one of the best elevators in New York City. There are mirrors all around. You can see yourself from every angle. There's a soft, cushioned bench to sit on if you're too tired to stand. The elevator operator's name is Henry Belvenheimer. He lets us call him Henry because Belvenheimer's very hard to say. Our apartment's on the 12th floor, but I don't have to tell Henry. He already knows. He knows everybody in the building. He's just that smart. He even knows I'm 9 and in 4th grade. I showed him Dribble right away. I won him at a birthday party, I said. Henry smiled. Your mother's going to be surprised. Henry was right. My mother was really surprised. Her mouth opened when I said, just look at what I won at Jimmy Fargo's birthday party. I held up my tiny green turtle. I've already named him Dribble. Isn't that a great name for a turtle? My mother made a face. I don't like the way he smells, she said. Well, what do you mean? I asked. I put my nose right down close to him. I didn't smell anything but turtle. So, Dribble smells like a turtle, I thought. Well, he's supposed to. That's what he is. And I'm not going to take care of him either, my mother added. Of course you're not, I told her. He's my turtle, and I'm the one who's going to take care of him. You're going to change his water and clean out his bowl and feed him and all of that, she asked. Yes, I said, and even more, I'm going to see to it that he's happy. This time, my mother made a funny noise, like a groan. I went into my bedroom. I put Dribble on the top of my dresser. I tried to pet him and tell him he would be happy living with me. But it ain't easy to pet a turtle. They aren't soft and furry, and they don't lick you or anything. Still, I had my very own pet at last. Later, when I sat down at the dinner table, my mother said, I smell turtle. Peter, go scrub and wash your hands. Some people might think that my mother is my biggest problem. She doesn't like turtles. She's always telling me to scrub my hands. That doesn't mean just run them under the water. Scrub means I'm supposed to use soap and rub my hands together. Then I've got to rinse them and dry them. I ought to know by now. I've heard it enough. But my mother isn't my biggest problem. Neither is my father. He spends a lot of time watching commercials on TV. That's because he's in the advertising business. These days, his favorite commercial is the one about Juicio. He wrote it himself, and the president of Juicio Company liked it so much, he sent my father a whole crate of Juicio for our family to drink. It tastes like a combination of oranges, pineapples, grapefruits, pears, and bananas. And if you want to know the truth, I'm getting pretty sick of drinking it. But Juicio isn't my biggest problem either. Okay, let's stop here and let's talk about a few words. So we see the word right here, commercial. So you probably already know the word commercial because you watch a lot of TV and there's definitely commercials on TV. We can use our context clues to show that something is on TV because right here it says watching commercials on TV. So we know it's not a show, and it's probably an advertisement. That brings us down to our next word about advertising business. So if you are making an advertisement, you are trying to get other people to buy those things. And that's kind of what a commercial does. So his father works for an advertising business. So he kind of does everything in relations to advertisements. My biggest problem is my brother, Farley Drexel Hatcher. He's 2.5 years old. Everybody calls him Fudge. I feel sorry for him if he's going to grow up with a name like Fudge, but I don't say a word. It's none of my business. Fudge is always in my way. He messes up everything he sees. And when he gets mad, he throws himself flat on the floor and he screams. And he kicks and he bangs his fists. The only time I really like him is when he's sleeping. He sucks 4 fingers on the left hand and makes a slurping noise. When Fudge saw Dribble, he said, "Ooh." And I said, "That's my turtle. Get it? Mine. You don't touch him." Fudge said, "No touch." Then he laughed like crazy. So what do you think is going to happen in chapter 2? The title is Mr. and Mrs. Juicio. So do you think that Fudge is going to leave the turtle alone? Or do you think something's going to happen to the turtle? Let's keep reading. One night, my father came home from the office all excited. He told us Mr. and Mrs. Yarby were coming to New York. He's the president of the Juicio Company. He lives in Chicago. I wondered if he'd bring my father another crate of Juicio. If he did, I'd probably be drinking it for the rest of my life. Just thinking about it was enough to make my stomach hurt. My father said he invited Mr. and Mrs. Yarby to stay with us. My mother wanted to know why they couldn't stay at a hotel like most people who come to New York. My father said they couldn't, but my father said they could, but he didn't want them to. He thought they'd be more comfortable staying with us. My mother said that was about the silliest thing she had ever heard. But she fixed up Fudge's bedroom for our guest. She put fancy sheets and a brand new blanket on the hide-a-bed. So if you are living in New York City, we know that New York City has a lot of tight places. So we already know that they're living in an apartment on the 12th floor of something. Now, a hide-a-bed is actually a bed that you can either convert into a couch, or sometimes in New York City, those are beds that could actually be pushed up into a wall. So when it was time to kind of go to sleep, you could bring your bed down and lay on it and have more space during the day. You would push it up. Or a hide-a-bed is kind of like a futon, maybe type thing that you could convert into a couch and then open up for a bed later in the night. That's a sofa that opens up into a bed at night. And it's in Fudge's room because that used to be our den. So it is a sofa that opens up. Before he was born, we watched TV in there. And lots of times, Grandma slept over on the hide-a-bed. Now we watch TV right in the living room, and Grandma doesn't sleep over very often. My mother moved Fudge's crib into my room. He's going to get a regular bed when he's 3, my mother says. There are a lot of reasons I don't like to sleep in the same room as Fudge. I found that out 2 months ago when my bedroom was being painted. I had to sleep in Fudge's room for 3 nights because the paint smell made me cough. For one thing, he talks in his sleep. And if a person didn't know any better, a person could get scared. Another thing is that slurping noise he makes. It's true that I like to hear it when I'm awake, but when I'm trying to fall asleep, I like things very, very quiet. When I complained about having to sleep with Fudge, my mother said, "It's just for 2 nights, Peter. I'll sleep in the living room," I suggested, "on the sofa, or even a chair." "No," my mother said. "You will sleep in your bedroom in your own bed." There was no point in arguing. Mom wasn't going to change her mind. She spent the day in the kitchen. She really cooked up a storm. She used so many pots and pans, Fudge didn't have any left to bang. And that's one of his favorite pastimes, banging pots and pans together. A person could get an awful headache listening to that racket. So a pastime is something that you do to pass the time. So it's an activity that you like to do to kind of make the time go faster. So some of your pastimes may be reading or exercising or playing video games or doing Legos. Right after lunch, my mother opened up the dinner table. We don't have a separate dining room. When we have company for dinner, we eat in one end of the living room. When Mom finished setting the table, she put a silver bowl filled with flowers right in the middle. I said, "Hey, Mom, it looks like you're expecting the president or something." "Very funny, Peter," my mother answered. Sometimes my mother laughs like crazy at my jokes. Other times she pretends not to get them. And then there are times when I know she gets them, but she just doesn't seem to like them. This was one of those times. So I decided no more jokes until after dinner. I went to Jimmy Fargo's for the afternoon. I came home at 4 o'clock. I found my mother standing over the dinner table mumbling. Fudge was on the floor playing with my father's socks. I'm not sure why he likes socks so much, but if you give him a few pairs, he'll play quietly for an hour. I said, "Hi, Mom, I'm home." "I'm missing 2 flowers," my mother said. I don't know how she noticed that 2 flowers were missing from her silver bowl, because there were at least a dozen of them left. But sure enough, when I checked, I saw 2 stems with nothing on them. "Don't look at me, Mom," I said. "What would I do with 2 measly flowers?" So we both looked at Fudge. "Did you take Mommy's pretty flowers?" my mother asked him. "No take," Fudge said. He was chewing on something. "What's in your mouth?" my mother asked. Fudge didn't answer. "Show Mommy." "No show," Fudge said. "Oh, yes." My mother picked him up and forced his mouth open. She fished out a rose petal. "What did you do to Mommy's flowers?" She raised her voice. She was getting really upset. Fudge laughed. "Tell Mommy." "Yum," Fudge said. "Yummy, yummy, yummy." "Oh no," my mother cried, rushing to the telephone. She called Dr. Cone. She told him that Fudge ate 2 flowers. Dr. Cone must have asked what kind, because my mother said, "Roses, I think, but I can't be sure. One might have been a daisy." There was a long pause while my mother listened to whatever Dr. Cone had said. Then Mom said, "Thank you, Dr. Cone." She hung up. "No more flowers," she told Fudge. "You understand?" "No more," Fudge repeated. "No more, no more, no more." My mother gave him a spoonful of peppermint flavored medicine, the kind I take when I have a stomach pains. Then she carried Fudge off to have his bath. Leave it to my brother to eat flowers. I wonder how they tasted. Maybe they're delicious, and I don't even know because I never tasted one. I thought, I decided to find out. I picked off one petal from a pink rose. I put it in my mouth and I tried to chew it up, but I couldn't do it. It tasted awful. Spit it out in the garbage. Well, at least now I know I wasn't missing anything great. Fudge ate his supper in the kitchen before our company arrived. While he was eating, I heard my mother remind him, Fudgy's going to be a good boy tonight. Very good boy for Daddy's friends. Good, Fudge said. Good boy. That's right, my mother told him. I changed and scrubbed up while Fudge finished his dinner. I was going to eat with the company. Being 9 has its advantages. My mother was all dressed up by the time my father got home with the Yarbies. You'd never have guessed that Mom spent most of the day in the kitchen. You'd also never have guessed that Fudge ate 2 flowers. He was feeling fine. He even smelled nice, like baby powder. Mrs. Yarby picked him up right away. I knew she would. She looked like a grandmother. That type always makes a big deal out of Fudge. She walked into the living room, cuddling him. Then she sat down on the sofa and bounced Fudge around on her lap. Isn't he the cutest little boy? Mrs. Yarby said. I just love babies. She gave him a big kiss on top of his head. I kept waiting for somebody to tell her Fudge was no baby, but no one did. My father carried the Yarby suitcase into Fudge's room. When he came back, he introduced me to our company. This is our older son, Peter, he said to the Yarbys. I'm 9 and I'm in the 4th grade, I told him. How do, Peter? Mr. Yarby said. Mrs. Yarby gave me a nod. She was still busy with Fudge. I have a surprise for this dear little boy, she said. It's in my suitcase. Should I go get it? Yes, Fudge shouted. Go get. Mrs. Yarby laughed as if that was the best joke she had ever heard. I'll be right back, she told Fudge. She put him down and ran off to find her suitcase. She came back carrying a present tied up with a red ribbon. Ooh, Fudge cried, opening his eyes. Goody, he clapped his hands. Mrs. Yarby helped him unwrap his surprise. It was a wind-up train that made a lot of noise. Every time it bumped into something, it turned around and went the other way. Fudge liked it a lot. He likes anything that's noisy. I said, That's a nice train. Mrs. Yarby turned to me. Oh, I have something for you too. Peter, I reminded her. My name is Peter. Yes, well, I'll go get it. Mrs. Yarby left the room again. This time she came back with a flat package. It was wrapped up too, red ribbon and all. She handed it to me. Fudge stopped playing with his train long enough to come over and see what I got. I took off the paper very carefully in case my mother wanted to save it, and also to show Mrs. Yarby that I'm a lot more careful about things than my brother. I'm not sure she noticed. My present turned out to be a big picture dictionary, the kind I liked when I was about 4 years old. My old one is actually in Fudge's bookcase now. I don't know much about big boys, Mrs. Yarby said, so the lady in the story said a nice book would be a good idea. Yeah, a nice book would have been a good idea, I thought, but a picture dictionary? That's for babies. So anytime we see this italicized words, so our words are like slanted, this is like basically what he's thinking in his brain to himself. He's not saying this out loud, and the narrator's not telling the story either. It's just basically kind of his own thoughts. I've had my own regular dictionary since I was 8, but I knew I had to be polite, so I said, "Thank you very much. It's just what I've always wanted." I'm so glad, Mrs. Yarby said. She let out a long sigh and sat back on the sofa. My father offered the Yarbys a drink. Good idea, Mr. Yarby said. What'll it be? My father asked. What'll it be? Mr. Yarby repeated, laughing. What do you think, Hatcher? It'll be Juicio. That's all we ever drink. Good for your health. Mr. Yarby pounded his chest. Of course, my father said, like he knew it all along. Juicio for everyone. My father told my mother. She went into the kitchen to get it. While my father and Mr. Yarby were discussing Juicio, Fudge disappeared. Just as my mother served everyone a glass of Mr. Yarby's favorite drink, he came back. He was carrying a book, my old, worn-out picture dictionary, the same as the one the Yarbys just gave me. See? Fudge said, climbing up on Mrs. Yarby's lap. See book? I wanted to vanish. I think my father and mother did too. See book? Now Fudge held it up over his head. I can use another one, I explained. I really can. That old one is falling apart. I tried to laugh. It's returnable, Mrs. Yarby said. It's silly to keep if you already have one. She sounded insulted, like it was my fault she brought me something I already had. Mine, Fudge said. He closed the book and held it against his chest. Mine, 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 mine. It's the thought that counts, my mother said. It was so nice of you to think of our boys. Then she turned to Fudge. Put the book away now, Fudgy. Isn't it Fudgy's bedtime? My father hinted. Oh, yes, I think it is, my mother said, scooping him up. Say good night, Fudgy. Good night, Fudgy, my brother said, waving at us. Fudge was supposed to fall asleep before we sat down to dinner, but just in case, my mother put a million little toys in his crib to keep him busy. I don't know who my mother thought she was fooling, because we all know that Fudge can climb out of his crib at any old time he wants to. He stayed away until we were in the middle of our roast beef. Then he came in carrying Dribble's bowl. He walked right up to Mrs. Yarby. He thought she was his new friend. See, he said, holding Dribble under her nose. See, Dribble? Mrs. Yarby shrieked, Oh! I can't stand reptiles. Get that thing away from me. Fudge looked disappointed. So he showed Dribble to Mr. Yarby. See, he said, Hatcher! Mr. Yarby boomed. Make him get that thing out of here. I wondered why Mr. Yarby called my father Hatcher. Didn't he know his first name was Warren? And I didn't like the way Mr. and Mrs. Yarby both called Dribble a thing. I jumped up. Give him to me, I told Fudge. I took Dribble and his bowl and marched into my room. I inspected my turtle all over. He seemed all right. I didn't want to make a big scene in front of our company, but I was mad. I mean, really mad. That kid knows he's not allowed to touch my turtle. Peter, my father called, come and finish your dinner. When I got back to the table, I heard Mrs. Yarby say, It must be interesting to have children. We never had any ourselves. But if we did, Mr. Yarby told my father, we'd teach them some manners. I'm a firm believer in old-fashioned good manners. So are we, Howard, my father said in a weak voice. I thought Mr. Yarby had a lot of nerve to hint that we had no manners. Didn't I pretend to like their dumb old picture dictionary? If that isn't good manners, then I don't know what is. My mother excused herself and carried Fudge back to my room. I guess she put him into his crib again. I hope she told him to keep his hands off my things. We didn't hear from him again until dessert. Just as my mother was pouring the coffee, he ran in wearing my rubber gorilla mask from last Halloween. It's a very real looking mask. I guess that's why Mrs. Yarby screamed so loud. If she hadn't made so much noise, my mother probably wouldn't have spilled the coffee all over the floor. My father grabbed Fudge and pulled the gorilla mask off of him. That's not funny, Fudge, he said. Funny, Fudge laughed. Funny, 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 Fudgy. Yes, sir, Hatcher, Mr. Yarby said. Old-fashioned manners. By that time, I'm sure my father was sorry the Yarbys weren't staying at a hotel. I finally got to bed at 10. Fudge was in my crib slurping away. I thought I'd never fall asleep, but I guess I did. I woke up once when Fudge started babbling. He said, Booba mama haba she, whatever that means. I didn't even get scared. I whispered, shut up, and he did. Early the next morning, I felt something funny on my arm. At first, I didn't wake up. I just felt this little tickle. I thought it was part of my dream, but then I had a feeling somebody was staring at me, so I opened my eyes. Fudge was standing over me, and Dribble was crawling around my arm. I guess Fudge could tell I was about ready to kill him because he bent down and kissed me. That's what he does when my mother's angry at him. He thinks nobody can resist him when he makes himself so lovable. And a lot of times he works with my mother. But not me. I jumped up, put Dribble back into his bowl, and smacked Fudge on the backside. Hard. He hollered. My father came running into my room. He was still in his pajamas. He whispered, "What's going on in here?" I pointed at Fudge, and he pointed at me. My father picked up my brother and carried him off. "Go back to sleep, Peter," he said. "It's only 6 o'clock in the morning." I fell asleep for another hour, then woke up to an awful noise. It was Fudge playing with his new train. It woke everybody, including the Yarbies. But this time, there was nobody they could blame. They were the ones who gave Fudge the train in the first place. Breakfast was a very quiet affair. Nobody had much to say. Mr. Yarby drank 2 glasses of Juicio. Then he told my father that he and Mrs. Yarby had their suitcase packed. They were leaving for a hotel as soon as breakfast was over. My father said he understood the apartment was too small for so many people. My mother didn't say anything. When Mr. Yarby went into Fudge's bedroom to pick up the suitcase, his voice boomed, "Hatcher!" My father ran toward the bedroom. My mother and Mrs. Yarby followed him, and I followed them. When we got there, we saw Fudge sitting on the Yarby's suitcase. He had decorated it with about 100 green stamps, the kind my mother gets from the supermarket. "See?" Fudge said. "See? Pretty." He laughed. Nobody else did. Then he licked the last green stamp and stuck it right in the middle of the suitcase. "All gone," Fudge sang, holding up his hands. It took my mother half an hour to peel off her trading stamps and clean up the Yarby suitcase. The next week, my father came home from the office and collected all the cans of Juicio in our house. He dumped them into the garbage. My mother felt bad that my father had lost such an important account, but my father told her not to worry. Juicio wasn't selling very well at stores. Nobody seemed to like the combination of oranges, grapefruits, pineapples, pears, and banana. "You know what, Dad?" I said. "I only drank Juicio to be polite. I really hated it." "You know something funny, Peter?" my father said. "I thought it was pretty bad myself." So that's the end of chapters 1 and 2. So I hope that you enjoyed what's going on right now. And I have a couple of follow-up questions for you. So thinking about author's point of view and what point of view the story is being told in, do we have it being told from a first-person point of view or a third-person point of view? So you could be looking for clue words that tell you who is telling the story. Right, so it is told in first-person point of view, okay? And we know that the main character is telling the story. We can understand what he is thinking about, what he's feeling. We also know what he's thinking because they've put in that those italicized words for us to see too, okay? So a good summary of chapters 1 and 2 was Peter got a turtle from a birthday party and he brought it home to have in his house. So kind of that was the gist of chapter 1. He got a turtle, he brought it home, and his name was Dribble. The summary of chapter 2 was the Yarbies came over to the parents' home for a business meeting, and Fudge was a terror and scared them off, and the Yarbies ended up leaving, and the father lost the account. So again, a summary is just the big ideas. So if you didn't read chapters 1 and 2 and I told you just the summary of what happened, you would still have a good understanding of what happened in chapters 1 and 2. I didn't tell you a detail about how Fudge ate flowers. I didn't tell you details about how Peter got a book that he already had. So I'm just kind of giving you the big ideas or the big gist of what happened. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop today. And the next recording, I probably will record chapter 3 and then another recording in chapter 4. So hope you guys are liking the book so far. If you want to read chapter 3 or 4 on your own, just come back and you can listen to or read whatever you'd like. All right, have a good day.